But you can have a democracy and still have economia with a church. You can have a king and have economia with a church. Christianity and Christian ethics can exist in any type of government. Even communism, it can exist as long as the communists don't wipe them out.
Your Bible is just as intangible as the rights that our current government is founded on, except one of them expresses itself as an object of morality, complete morality, because of the good outcomes it creates in society for women and children, and whereas the other one is just individual rights, right?
No, I don't think that's the case. So, I mean, forgive me if I'm not following this correctly, but you're saying that biblical values are just as subjective as
rights,
as your rights and preferences?
Yeah.
Well, that can't really be true, even from a subjective angle, because if you say you're a Christian, then you have to adhere to Christian ethics.
False.
Well, then you can't be a Christian.
Isn't it just that you got to be saved? You got to believe in God dying on the cross?
Let me ask you a question. If you're born in Mexico and you live in Mexico, are you an American?
Obviously, the question of citizenship is not the same as religious affiliation.
Because there's a specific criteria, right? So you can't, just calling yourself an American wouldn't make you one.
Anyone who believes in God is considered... Okay,
No.
It depends what sect you follow.
No, everything has specific criteria. Christianity, faith in Christ,
and
follows
all of them,
Christian ethics. They have to.
All of them are subjective, and they're all written down and made up by different men.
But if there is specific criteria for Christianity, then you would have to follow specific ethical frameworks within Christianity. From a secular framework of preference, you're actually telling everybody to follow whatever set of ethics they so choose.
Isn't that better than telling everyone to just follow the one that you ascribe to?
No, it's way worse, especially for society. Do you want people to arbitrarily decide whether or not they can murder based on their preferences?
So if everyone in America ascribed to Hinduism, you just have a great time tomorrow with our new Hindu democratically elected government?
No, but it would still be a more moral society than if everybody was secularist who followed their own whims and preferences.
So that's just where we fundamentally disagree. I believe you can have morality in secularism, and you think it's fundamentally impossible to be secular and moral.
How can you say that preferences are what is moral, your own individual preference, and nothing but your individual preference, and then say his could be wrong about anything? How can you do that?
Well, I'm not saying the individual preference of each individual person is moral. I'm saying what the moral thing to do is allow everyone to have their own individual preferences.
Then how can anybody justify that anybody else's morality is incorrect if
harm principle?
Okay, but that's a subjective preference again.
Harm principle is not a subjective preference.
Listen, why should we follow the harm principle?
Because it actually causes physical harm at that point.
Yeah, but that's not telling us why we should follow it. I know it does cause harm, but why ought we not cause harm?
Because you're infringing on someone else's ability to exercise their individual rights every day. Because, like I said from the beginning, it's about individuality. You have empathy. You treat what's the golden rule? Treat every other person as you have yourself.
Yeah.
That
or you can say
moral.
that's a categorical imperative, but all of this will reduce if I keep going with you.
Yeah, Kant's categorical imperative. Thank you. You reminded me.
If I keep on moving down the goal here, it's going to reduce to relativism. Why should we follow that? Why should we follow this? Why should we follow that? Eventually, it's going to get down to because you would prefer that I do. Right? There's really no other way around that.
So it's either religion or moral relativism.
That's right.
Okay, then anyone who's not religious, you're a moral relativist. Congrats.
Yeah, well, but they all know that. They all know that they're moral relativists.
Oh,
like none of them are confused.
Oh,
yeah, but now you know. Yeah, it basically always reduces. There could be some arguments, I think, which can be made against it, but basically all of it reduces to relativism and preference. So if it does, and it's all just based on your preferences, just things you prefer, then you can never justify why this guy's preferences and that guy's preferences are no better than your own.
You can justify it based on the categorical imperative. Are you
that
using other people or
deontology.
Oppressing other people for your own
You just
personal
said you're
gain?
utilitarian, the categorical imperative, that's Kantianism, that's deontology. They're in opposition to each other.
I wrote my college application essay on Kant.
Then how did you not know that Kant is literally the opposite of Bentham and Mill? Opposite, 100%. The deontology is direct opposition to utilitarianism. One is consequentialism, one's universalism. So... I don't know. Yeah, they're not even in the same universe.
Well, I was just saying We already showed that I'm not actually utilitarian.
Yeah, and
you fucked me up from the beginning because you asked me to classify myself, and I don't know what I am.
Okay. Well, fair enough.
All right, we have another. I had one question. Earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned something about hedonism, and I don't want to misquote you. You said something along the lines of people should be able to do whatever they want and pursue like the maximum degree or amount of happiness or
as
pleasure.
long as it doesn't break the categorical imperative, meaning they're not hurting other people in the process of doing so.
So, but that's your kind of guiding philosophy?
Not exactly. I'd say hedonism is more of like a personal philosophy for me. And I think that's typically that's how it's talked about in most contexts. I was just saying I think people should be allowed to be hedonistic if they want to be. The government shouldn't be saying you shouldn't be hedonistic. You should be moral and stay home and take care of your kids. Like the government's not the one who should be saying that.
But if the government says, or if you're saying the government shouldn't do something, right? They ought not do that. Then you're saying that the government shouldn't follow its preferences. Whose preferences should it follow?
The people's.
And whose preferences should they follow?
Their own.
Then everybody's individualistic preferences are just as valid as anybody else's.
Okay.
Just
Never
saying.
said they weren't.
And so when it comes to the hedonism, you said that's your own personal...
Not completely. I was just throwing some words in there. I don't know.
Well, I mean, how does that manifest for you?
Hedonism? I was trying to use that more in the context of like, he was saying that it would be completely evil of a woman to say like, my husband makes me unhappy and you know, I'd rather just go live with my kids alone in fucking Alaska. And I'm saying that people should be able to do that and be hedonistic and chase their desires, and they shouldn't be like...
At the expense of their children.
It's not always at the expense of the child.
But
maybe the child would have a better life not listening to mom and dad yell at each other all day long.
Use of at the expense of the children. Prioritizing her happiness over the expense of the children. Like how you left that part out, but that's what I actually said.
The children can prioritize their own happiness when they get older.
Oh, no way you just said that. The children can prioritize their own happiness when they... Those kids, little bastards. Now you know why 1 in 4 of them have mental illness. Because they need to prioritize their happiness when they get older.
I see myself as one of those children who come from a broken home, and I'd like to be able to prioritize my own happiness regardless of the circumstances.
Even over your own children?
In the future, if I had to divorce okay, I don't want to get divorced. I definitely don't. And obviously.
But if you were going to be happier divorced, even if it was at the expense of your children.
Obviously, I'm not going to live every day in misery, but I would have to weigh the values at that time, especially considering what the reason was for the divorce. And
you were unhappy. You wanted to f John down the street because John looked really good and had a nicer car.
I wouldn't do that. Okay, there's a difference between hedonism and doing what you want. I don't mean like...
No, I agree with that.
I don't mean like every single thought that you think of. I'm saying you should be able to act based on your pleasure rather than moral rules.
Who prioritize their happiness, they don't actually step out on their husband, but they want John. They want John down the street. They're not going to step out. So they go to their husband and they say, listen, I am miserable in this marriage. And I want this guy, this other guy who's not you. And that's going to maximize my happiness. They leave their husband and break up their family so that they can go pursue John?
You're neglecting to weigh how much happiness it brings them to have their like children happy and together with the family too, because women do have to weigh that when they're thinking about whether or not they're going to divorce.
Yeah, but is she doing something wrong by doing that is my question.
Is she doing something wrong by doing that? I mean, it's not right, and I wouldn't.
So is it
I wouldn't
wrong?
want her to do it.
Is it wrong? She should not
but
be able to do it.
It should be legal.
It should be legal. So yeah. So I mean, ultimately, like the kids, right? It's not really wrong.
Yeah, but how the are you going to enforce a law that's like?
You add fault to divorces so that there's penalties, so that you can't go to your husband and say, "I want to go the neighbor."
You just gave me an exception. You just gave me a huge exception. Like it could have been based on any other number of factors besides wanting to go the neighbor.
Yeah, and all those factors can be taken into consideration for a penalty or an at-fault divorce instead of a no-fault divorce. Who's at fault for the divorce? So if you decide to prioritize your happiness over your family, you don't get to walk away and get the kids and get the car and get the house and get the money.
They do that in divorce court anyways, basically.
Yeah, but that's because it's a no-fault divorce. You don't have to show any cause for why you want the divorce. And if you had to, then you could determine who's at fault, and then you can split assets correctly because we know who fucked the marriage up. You went out and fucked John down the road or whatever, right? Same thing with the husband. That's a much better system.
Okay. I recognize everything you're talking about is like bad for the kids, but I still don't understand why you would want to bring the law into it, especially if there's people out there who, like, I don't know, might not, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the law's involved in it
Who
either
might
way.
not even, like, think that the nuclear family is important at all. Like,
Yeah, that's true, but that's really, again, when it comes to what is optimal for children, if you are intentionally raising your kids outside of a nuclear family as like some kind of FU to society, then you're immediately doing something which is you should probably think twice about, right? So if this happens all the time, essentially it's single mom regret, right? They'll go and they'll get knocked up because they really, really want to have a kid. And then they go, fuck, I really didn't think this through because kid wants dad. Kid wants a dad. There are women who get, now this isn't well-studied phenomenon at all, right? I'm just bringing it up to kind of make an example. But there are people who go and they impregnate women as a job. They actually will go, they'll show up to their
surrogate
house.
fathers, right?
Nope.
Kind
They're
of?
not surrogate fathers.
Okay.
Well, I mean, they are, but what they do is they'll post an ad on Craigslist saying, I will impregnate whoever. And they show up to their house and they get these women pregnant. Sometimes it's with couples, sometimes it's not. But they did track one guy. And I read this article not too long ago. They tracked this guy. He had impregnated like 800 women. Okay. He had tons of kids out there. And they went and met up with some of these moms. And some of them were like, yeah, probably shouldn't have done that because I really wanted to have a baby, but I didn't really think